Hi, welcome to my channel. Today, I am deeply honored to share a story that breathes with the scent of damp cedar and the quiet strengths of the northern interior. It is the journey of Dr. Hester Kidd, a brilliant Gitxsan woman who lost her way in the ivory towers of the East, and her encounter with a master carver, a respected elder named Harold Simoyet. This is a narrative of how the Great Spirit speaks through the grain of the wood to pull a soul back from the precipice of shadow. Dendrology is the intimate biography of trees. It is the study of their woody tissues, their cellular architecture, and the silent language of their bark. After decades in Ontario and Quebec, where I mastered the science of wood at the University Laval and dove into the structural poetry of the Mass Timber Institute at the University of Toronto, I returned to BC to teach at the University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. I was a doctor of science, a specialist in the resilience of fiber, yet I was returning to a landscape I had spent 30 years trying to erase from my mind, carrying a knowledge of wood that was strictly clinical, devoid of spirit. I had fled the Gitxsan nation as a girl, swearing never to return to the ghost of old Hazelton. But life has a way of circling back like the rings of a tree. I visited my late mother's house, a structure that felt like a hollow shell. There was no joy in my homecoming, only a terrifying numbness in my heart. The house was empty, the air tasted of old grief, and I stood in the center of the rooms I once knew, feeling like a stranger on my own skin, unable to even weep for the displacement I felt. Behind the closed doors of my university office, I was drowning. Alcohol and drugs were the only salves for the rot I felt inside. I would lose myself in the neon haze of bars or the kitchens of strangers, only to wake on the gray light of morning with a hangover that felt like a physical weight on my soul. I was a professor, cloaked in expensive perfumes and bathed in salts to hide the stench of the previous night decay, terrified that the students and colleagues would smell the rot through the lavender. I was 50 years old, a hollowed-out tree standing by sheer habit, unsure if I even wanted the light to touch me again. Walking through the corridors of the university one morning, my eyes caught a poster. The university had invited an elder from the Gitxsan nation to be a presence on campus, a sanctuary for those needing counsel. It was part of the university's commitment to waving people back into the academic fabric. I looked at the face of the poster and I felt a jolt of recognition, a memory from my youth in Terrace, of a man who tried to teach me art when I was nothing but a rebel, a girl with fire in her eyes and a bottle in her bag. Hunger, raw and nagging, led me to the cafeteria. I saw him there, Simoyet. He wore his traditional vestments with a quiet dignity that made my skin prickle with shame. I tried to avoid his gaze, but the cafeteria tables are long and communal. Without a word, he sat beside me. We ate in a silence that was neither cold nor warm. It just was. As he finished, he pushed a small yellow post-it note toward me with a date and an address in Prince George. He remembered me. He saw the shadow in my eyes that I thought the perfume and makeup had hidden. Back in my cold apartment, the silence was a predator. I looked at the note and, driven by desperate curiosity, drove to the address. It was the community center, Simoyet was waiting at the door. He took my arm with a firm, wordless kindness and led me into a room where a circle of chairs waited. It was an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting. I sat in the back, silent, listening to the cadence of shared pain. At the end, he didn't ask for a confession. He simply handed me another note. This one had an address in Old Hazleton. The following Friday was another descent. A blackout, a Saturday morning of absolute absolution in the bottle. When I finally emerged from the fog, the post-it note was still in my coat pocket. I had nowhere else to run. I was exhausted from the pursuit of my own destruction. I started the car and began the long 400 kilometers drive from Prince George to Old Hazleton, passing through the silhouettes of the mountains, driving toward the very pain I had spent a lifetime at running. My mother had died of this same disease. As I drove, I remember the rare moments she was sober, when she would whisper about the residential schools, about the theft of her language, the cold floors, and the way they tried to screw the Gitxsan heart out of her. She never found the medicine to heal those wounds, so she drank until her liver failed and her spirit broke. I had left for Quebec to bury her memory, but here I was, crossing the bridge over Bulkley River, returning to the soil where her tears were still wet. At the community center in Old Hazleton, Simoyet was there, smiling with a patience that felt like an ancient cedar. This was a different meeting. It was the red road to Wellbriety. When it was my turn, I didn't hide. "My name is Kit," I said, the name sounding strange and heavy on my tongue, "and I'm an alcoholic." I talked until my throat was raw, about my mother, about the void, about the 30 years of pretending. When I sat down, the first tears I had shed in decades tracked through the dust on my cheeks. After the meeting, Simoyet invited me to his home. His wife, Amamit, welcomed me with a meal of jarred salmon, bannock, and soap berries. The atmosphere was thick with a calm I didn't understand. Afterward, Harold led me to his workshop, a great shed where a massive log of western red cedar lay like a sleeping giant. The university had commissioned a totem, and he invited me to join the carvers. I was exhausted, depleted of lies. He offered me a set of keys, the keys to my mother's house, which he had been watching over. I walked into my mother's house to find it clean, the air fresh, the utilities humming with life. In the center of the living room, the weight of the world finally broke me. I collapsed into a fetal position and cried for the lost years, for the stolen children, for the mother I couldn't save. I cried until my body was a hollow reed. Eventually, I crawled into the sofa and wrapped myself in a beautiful quilt that Amamit had left for me, a tapestry of stars that felt like a shield. I awoke to a world that seemed to have been washed clean. In the fridge, there was a feast, eggs, sausages, and sourdough toast. I ate with reverence. This tasted like life itself. I walked back to Harold's workshop with a lightness I hadn't felt since I was a child. I told him then, with a steady voice, that I wanted to learn. I wanted to touch the wood, not just as a scientist, but as a daughter of the Gitxsan. My weekends became a pilgrimage. Every Friday after my final lecture at the university, I would drive to Old Hazleton. I traded my lab coat for a carving apron. Harold taught me to use the 8C and the curved knife, tools that leave rhythmic marks like scales on a fish. I worked alongside young apprentices, my hands becoming calloused and stained with the earth. The art of the totem began to wrap around me, stitch by stitch, replacing the urge to reach for the bottle with the urge to reach for the grain. I began to walk the red road to Wellbriety in earnest. Every Saturday night, I attended the meetings at the community center, where Harold acted as my sponsor. We spoke of the Great Spirit and the balance of the medicine wheel. On Mondays, I would drive back to Prince George to teach my students about the cellular structure of trees, but my lectures were changing. I was beginning to speak with the spirit of the wood. I cleaned my mother's house, one room at a time. It wasn't love yet, but it was a beginning, a quiet, orderly peace. Harold showed me the design of the university totem. The base was a bear, representing the strength of the ancestors and the protection of the family. He taught me why we use Western red cedar, not just for its grain, but for its natural oils that resist decay, a metaphor of our own survival. We made our own pigments, black from charcoal, red from baked ochre. This totem was a story of rebirth and reconnection. As I carved the ovoid eyes of the bear, I felt the Great Spirit moving towards my hands, carving away the rot of my own past, one day at a time. A year passed, a cycle of the seasons measured in cedar chips. We finished the pull. We celebrated with a potluck in the workshop, a cacophony of laughter and the smell of smoked meat. A week later, the university held the raising ceremony. Standing in the cold Prince George air, watching the community pull the ropes to lift our work toward the sky, I felt my roots finally taking hold in the frozen earth. Every time I walk past that pole now, I see my own healing reflected in its painted surface. Through Harold, I learned that even the strongest trees have scars. He told me of his own time in the residential schools, of the years he spent lost in the same bottle that claimed my mother. He showed me that the red road is not a destination, but a constant walking. I have been sober for a year now, yet I still fear the shadow of the liquor store. I understand now that my mother wasn't weak. She was a tree strip of its bark in a winter that lasted her whole life. I carry her sorrow, but I no longer let it drown me. One Friday evening, I returned to my house in Old Hazelton to find lights glowing in my back shed. There, resting on the carving blocks, the sturdy cradles we used to hold the giants, was a gift. A Western red cedar log, 3 meters tall and 50 centimeters wide. Beside it lay a set of professional carving tools and a note. For your own story. I stood in the yard, surrounded by the scent of the forest, and wept. The little lights Harold had strung up illuminated the wood, turning the cedar into a pillar of gold. That night, my dreams were visited by the orca. In our tradition, the orca is a symbol of family, of those who travel together through the deep. I knew then that my mother would be at the top of my totem, transformed into the killer whale, free of the weight of the shore. I still feel the tremors of my disease, but I'm no longer an island. I have Harold and Amamit. I have the circle, and I have my love for the wood. My story is no longer one of decay, but of transformation. My classroom at the university has become a sanctuary. When I teach dendrology now, I tell my students that trees are the keepers of time and the witnesses of our story. Through the great spirit and the discipline of the wood, I have found a faith that science alone could never provide. I walk the red road every day, sometimes stumbling, but always moving toward the light. I am Kit, a woman of the Gitxsan, and I'm finally, truly home. I hope this story of Dr. Kit and the ancient cedar of the Gitxsan nation has touched you as deeply as it has touched me. It reminds us that our roots are never truly gone. They are simply waiting for the right season to grow again. If you want to learn more about Canadian traditions, the art of the First Nations, and the hidden stories of the North, please subscribe to my channel. Let's keep exploring the heart of this land together. Until next time, see you later.